Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO. There are a number of amendments on the November ballot in Nebraska, constitutional amendments, two of them put on by petition. We're going to talk about one of those amendments today, term limits. So you can't say you won't know enough about it to vote on it. But talking about last week for just a moment, we have to revisit something. We were talking about a different amendment, proposed constitutional amendment 416 on that show, the Defense of Marriage Amendment. Towards the end of the show, and it was a debate with both sides, the woman representing the anti-416 side made a statement that former Nebraska football coach and current 3rd Congressional District candidate for Congress, Tom Osborne, had said that he is voting against 416. In other words, he is going to vote against the Defense of Marriage Amendment. Coach Tom Osborne tells us, or I should say Congressional candidate Osborne tells us, that is not his position. But I would like right now to read his official position at this point in time. In a letter to Consider This, he said, "I would like to clarify that I am not opposed to Initiative 416 and have never stated anything to that effect. I agree with the current Nebraska statute, which states that marriage is an institution involving a man and a woman." Now we can move on to this week's show. I'd like to introduce my guest, Randy Ritenour. Thanks for coming up from Tecumseh, Nebraska, although you've been sort of ubiquitous around the eastern part of the state in your lawyering and your political career. He is treasurer of a group that is trying to get 415
That's
passed.
correct.
I want to get those numbers right, and that is the Term Limits Amendment. And right now we're going to let you know exactly how that amendment will appear on your Nebraska November 7th ballot.
Shall the Nebraska Constitution be amended to provide that no person shall be eligible to serve as a member of the Nebraska legislature for 4 years after the expiration of 2 consecutive legislative terms? Legislative service prior to January 1st, 2001 will not be counted for the purpose of calculating consecutive legislative terms, and service in office for more than 1/2 of a legislative term will be considered service for a full term.
So basically, we're talking about the office of state senator. A vote for it would say, yep, I'm for limiting my state senator to 2 terms. A vote against it would say, no, I don't want to put limits at this time in this fashion. Randy, trying to put term limits on in Nebraska has a kind of a long and interesting history. Now,
Yes,
it's
it
only
does.
the last 10 years, but talk, can't think of anything that's been put before the voters in so many times, or attempted to put it before the voters. Let's go back to 1992.
Carol, I was involved in these last 2 efforts, which includes this one. I can't tell you exactly the history behind the previous 3 issues, except that I can tell you that in 1992 it was passed overwhelmingly, and then it was overturned, and I'm not sure whether that was based on the fact that there were federal candidates involved in that one, or whether that was the one where
Well, we can say it passed it overwhelmingly in 92 and 94.
Right.
It was turned over twice.
Right.
One time by a federal court, once by a state court. We can't remember which was the...
Yeah, I don't remember which was which, but essentially the issue was the same both times in the sense that federal candidates were involved, U.S. senators and representatives, and both the U.S. Supreme Court and Nebraska Supreme Court said that we could not limit them. It didn't say anything about whether or not we could still limit state senators.
So then in 1996, it passed overwhelmingly again, but there was a different problem with it.
Right. At that time then, there was a Supreme Court ruling that had to do with the number of petitioners that were involved in that particular election, and on whether or not the appropriate number of petitions were collected to be able to pass that initiative.
Now, in 1998, they made another stab, but it didn't get quite through getting signatures.
That's
there were some
correct.
problems with.
I was involved in that campaign, and that was Nebraskans for Term Limits, as opposed to Nebraskans for Limited Terms, which is the campaign that's going on now.
The current one. Oh, what a difference a couple of words
yeah, a couple
make.
of words makes. In that particular campaign, we just didn't get started soon enough, and didn't reach the appropriate number of petitioners that we needed, which had, by the way, gone up based on that Supreme Court ruling. And
now
and
you
so
have
we
the
didn't
new
make it.
and improved, in your thinking, proposition that we're strictly talking in 415 this year about limiting to 2 terms the job, that 2 consecutive terms for any one person in the unicameral.
Right, that's right. They're limited to up to 8 years, two consecutive terms. And that, by the way, will affect senators that are currently in office, so that if they were elected in 1998, some people say that that's a retroactive part of the amendment. I say that it's just affecting the senators who are already in office, and so it just affects everybody all the same. Everybody gets up to 8 years or up to 2 terms.
Okay, so how would it affect, who's been in the legislature the longest? Is Ernie?
Senator Chambers?
Senator Chambers?
I believe he is the longest
okay,
sitting
so
senator
I
now.
guess we'll call him the dean in terms of number of terms that he is serving. Does that mean, and he is not seeking re-election this year?
No, I don't believe
So,
he is.
okay, he was re-elected in 98.
Right.
So, okay, what would happen to him, as an example, if this law, if this were to become an amendment to the Constitution?
All right, his first term, his current term, the 1998 term, would be included as the first 4-year term that he could serve. Then he would have 1 additional term that he could serve before he would have to sit out for at least 1 term, and then he could run again if he wanted to.
So then, and anyone that was elected for the first time this year, let's say, then it begins.
Then it begins as soon as they're elected.
This would be their first of 2 consecutive terms they could
Right.
possibly serve.
Correct.
All right, now this is one of those things that all the times that it's come up, I have really debated it in my mind because it's so overwhelmingly accepted. I mean, just to give you an idea, in 1992, when the voters of Nebraska passed it the first time, and we don't know in their mind if they just were talking, I don't like those state senators serving, or if I don't like my congressman serving. We don't know where their heads were, but the numbers were made a pretty strong statement. 481,000 Nebraskans voted for it. 224,000 voted against it. That's more than a 2-to-1 margin.
Right.
And then the margins were plus or minus 2-to-1 the subsequent 2 times.
Right.
So we know that Nebraskans feel there should be some limitations. We limit other offices.
Well, exactly. We limit the governor's office to 2 terms. The President of the United States is limited to two terms. We haven't heard very much about the governor's 2-term limit being in some way unfair or somehow limiting what Nebraskans' choices are with respect to candidates, because we believe that there are plenty of talented people out there who ought to be given the opportunity to run for state senator.
Well, I'm assuming then that part of your political philosophy in supporting it, rather than just a gut reaction, I'm sure people just go, they'd vote for it just because politicians drive them crazy. I mean, and we have a lot of cynicism about our politicians. But part of your political philosophy that I think you just stated is that we want to get more people involved as citizen legislators and not have these professional politicians around, even though they're not making a massive amount of money in the state.
Absolutely. What we believe is that a limited number of terms for a state senator will limit the amount of influence that any particular special moneyed interest has lobbyists or otherwise with state senators. One of the ways that lobbyists tend to have clout within the state legislature is that they get to know a senator, they begin to become familiar with them, support what the senator's doing, support him financially in some respect, either during the campaign or in some other area where he needs support with respect to helping him
Little
garner
deal
votes.
making, maybe. is what you're
Exactly,
saying.
and if you know a state senator, if you've known him for 15 or 20 years or whatever, as a lobbyist, you can walk right in there and you have more access to that state senator than most citizens do. And so what we want to do is we want to have elected officials who are closer to the people, who have been out there under, I'll just say, in the real world recently, and can come back into the state legislature and really understand what citizens want as opposed to what lobbyists are wanting.
Let me play devil's advocate, since we don't have a debate here with the other side, which always makes it easy for me, because I can just sit there and turn my head from side to side. But I lived for a while in Dan Lynch's district in Omaha, and I think he's second or third in line in longevity right now. And I personally have always liked Dan. And I knew that because of this clout that he had, that he would be able to have a little more relative power in trying to get what was good for, because I have my own special interest for my district and for Omaha.
Right.
So, in a way, yes, it is unfair that some have more, but on the other hand, do you think that if you just throw the straws up in the air and the most they can be up in the air is for 2 terms, that's going to put everything on a really more level playing field?
I think it is going to level it out with respect to how much influence a particular senator may have. But you have to understand that a good part of the clout that a state senator have is based on the fact that he is a state senator. So that will, that opens a lot of doors for a citizen of that district just by contacting the state senator and having him, for example, run interference for him on any particular issue or deal with state agencies or whatever else. And so I don't think that the fact that you have a state senator who's been there for 4 years or 6 years is going to be that much of a detriment to the people in the particular district.
Another thing that always occurred to me as a journalist, I had to cover state politics on occasion, not as a regular beat. And I have a hard time still to this day figuring out things. I can't imagine trying to figure out how bureaucrats in government hide things, the whole budgetary process. There are more skeletons in the bureaucracy of government. And I'm not saying any one governor was bad or any one administration, but just the part that continues to go on in the state.
Certainly.
You know what I mean? There's that part that will go on, and that's the bureaucracy, no matter whether we change governors or not.
Right.
And I've always, maybe it's my cynicism, found that part of it, and I'm not condemning state employees, potentially pretty insidious. And just because of the kind of person I am. And it takes a while, I think, to kind of figure out which lobbyists have the most power, which bureaucrats have the most power, who's hidden things the best, and how to figure out when someone's telling you the truth.
Right. But what you also have is if you have a long-standing senator, and there have been a lot of senators who are excellent senators and been there for a long time. And when I was a legislative aide, I worked for a couple of them.
That's right. You were working for Senator Persh when she was there.
Well, and Senator Cordson before that. And those are both excellent senators and did a real good job for their districts. But what you also see in the legislature is that at some point, people who've been there a long time, whether it's legislative aides or state senators or even the lobbyists, they get used to how the system works. And a new senator who came in who discovered how a particular system worked that might seem just absolutely outrageous to a normal citizen would be outraged. Whereas somebody who's been there for a long time could say, well, that's just the way it is, and that, that's just part of the system, and they just let it go. So, I would think that in some cases we might actually be able to kind of reduce some of that. I'm not going to call it graft, but the kind of the bureaucratic shuffle that you might get.
I mean, it's entrenched. The bureaucracy in any state, in any federal government, in any government that is pretty complicated,
right,
is pretty entrenched.
Certainly, but I mean, one of the ways you start to dig them out is we think, limit state senators, and then
So at least they're not entrenched.
Well,
or are you talking about new eyes, new ears?
Exactly, new people with new ideas. But what you also bring into that is, if the senators roll over, then a lot of times the legislative aides will roll over too, and they'll bring new people and new blood into this system, and they may have some effect on the rest of the bureaucratic system as well. We just think that new blood is the best way to go, and we think there are just wonderful, talented people out there who can fill the positions that long-standing state senators may fill now. And this is not about whether or not those senators are good senators or bad senators. We think there are plenty of talented people in Nebraska that can handle the position of state senator and do very well for the state.
Let me ask you this, and I don't mean to put you on the spot on this one because I just thought of this, or I would have asked you earlier. How many states have limited the terms
18.
Of their state legislators?
18.
And
they've been resisted in every possible way by those legislatures, and of course there are efforts ongoing in other states as well, and those are being resisted usually by the legislatures themselves.
Is there intrinsically a difference, though, between the lawmaking process and what it takes to know and learn that? I mean, we obviously don't have term limits in the federal Congress and Senate, and I'm sure they're resisting that. That would probably have to be a constitutional amendment,
right?
And they're probably not going to be the first ones to jump forward
right.
to favor that. But is there a difference possibly between the lawmakers and, for governors we limit terms, the president, the mayor, at least in Omaha, based on, isn't it odd that the administrators, the top administrator, we've limited, but we haven't limited the legislative part of our two biggest, the Congress and the state senates? Or do you feel it's just because the people, that was already done, and now maybe they're moving on to something else?
Well, I think here in Nebraska, it's because the people have been thwarted in that.
The history of it.
Obviously, but one of the things that you have to understand is that we are, in some sense, limiting the lawmaking capability or limiting the terms of lawmakers because the governor does propose bills, and he works through state senators to propose various things. So I think it's just much more difficult to get a legislature limited as opposed to a governor, simply because there's a lot more. It's a larger body. It has that lawmaking capability, and for example, there are 2 amendments that the legislature has up this year that will limit petition drives even more so than they are now. One is limiting the amount of time you have to engage in a petition drive, and the other one has to do with actually forcing petition drives to win in one election and then have it ratified again in the second election.
So what you're talking about there is kind of competition that the lawmakers have from the people, and you find that offensive.
Well, especially in the state of Nebraska, because the Nebraska unicameral was created with part of the philosophy of that, I should say, is that the people would be the second body or the second house of the legislature.
Right, and the Supreme Court has sort of upheld that philosophy.
And if you look historically at when the unicameral was created, that's just exactly the way it, that's the idea that they had when they created it. And now you have one of the bodies of this state government saying no. The people don't know what's best for them. We are going to limit their ability to petition by decreasing the time, by causing it to be ratified over a couple of periods.
And this is an ongoing thing. They have done other things to limit it.
Absolutely. Well, the issues with respect to the number of petitioners you have to have in a drive, and increase, moving to increase that in some fashion. That's all intended to protect the legislature and protect their position.
What if I give you the granddaddy of all arguments against term limits? We already have term limits. It's called an election.
Right, and we have had 3 different elections where the people of Nebraska have said, we want to limit the terms to 2 consecutive terms. Senators can run again after they sit out once, but we want to limit it. And what has happened is that a minority of individuals have then turned around and taken these matters to the judiciary and had the vote of the Nebraskan people overturned.
But that might have been viable on the issue of the federal, including the federal offices.
It may have, but the intent is the same. The intent is to prevent Nebraskans from making that choice by the usual campaign process.
Can I gig you a little on this one? Can I
Sure.
say I find it ironic that any attorney complains about someone from another side filing, since there's always got to be another side, and you're usually on one of the other sides. I couldn't resist it. I couldn't resist it. But what, by elections, I mean, I get a chance, not this time around, to vote for my state senator, but next time I will get a chance to depose. Isn't that as much the people's right? I mean, what is more the people's right?
Well, what you have to look at is that, particularly in this day and age, a senator who is any elected politician who's able to stay in for a long time is often able to build up a war chest. And if he can do that,
The financial clout that comes with the incumbency.
exactly, then what we have is it's a David and Goliath kind of an issue where yes, the people are voting for the 2 individuals, but the incumbent not only has the history behind him, the name recognition, but he's also got the money. And then we have the talented individuals that are also in that district who look at that and say, I'm not going to run. And I'm not going to run because I just don't have the money. I cannot win this election no matter what I try to do. And then there are the people who are brave enough to go ahead and run, and there's just a huge disparity in the chances they have to be elected.
Okay, let me put together a hypothetical right now. You guys are so good at that, you attorneys. Let's have a hypothetical that we put a package together that would limit state senators' terms to 2 consecutive terms, and that we would also increase their salary so that they could indeed concentrate on really learning the job in those 8 years, because they won't have the advantage of a learning curve, hopefully maybe being in 15 or 60, we have to be increments of 4, 12, 16, possibly 20 years. Because we had a unicameral candidate pull out in Omaha.
Right.
Because he was worried about supporting his family during that time.
And that's a legitimate
Could you
concern.
support I mean, we're not doing that. We're only voting on one thing. But hypothetically, could you say if we want to kind of churn the system up every 8 years, or every 6, there's staggered elections, that we should pay our state senators more?
I think that Workman's worthy of his hire. I think that you are helping the entire system if you get a livable salary for a state senator in there. Now that's a personal opinion. I can't tell you what the rest of the
what I'm asking, do you think maybe the state might be more, if this were to pass, might at least have a more open ear to that issue? They're not connected necessarily, but they could be.
I'm certain that state legislators would probably say yes. We would like to see our salaries raised, but I think that it's a great benefit to the state simply because then you have individuals who are out there who looking at this and saying, I can do the job. I don't have to try to either go to lobbyists or parties or anybody else and say,
and build
find
up
me a
that cloud
job.
to find maybe a better job. And we've seen that happen as senators hold office for a long time.
Certainly, but I think that what you then have is you have a lot of talented people who can say, that's a decent salary. I can not only pursue my ideals and serve the people, but I can also make a living doing it for the time period that I'm there. Now, I would not say that you'd want to do that without limiting terms for the very same reason.
Right. Well, the only reason I brought it up is because the learning curve is when you have a full-time job and you go into the unicameral. The learning curve is slow. I could see maybe improving that learning curve.
You'd help it along some, but you still have to remember that you do have legislative aides, you do have committee counsel and people like that who, although you say, they're part of the bureaucracy, at the same time they have a lot of institutional knowledge. They can assist senators with that learning curve, and they do. And so I think, having been a legislative aide, I would say that, within a year or two, most senators can come up to speed on most of the stuff that they have to worry about in the legislature and be pretty effective.
Since you did work as a legislative aide, and since you've became associated with this particular amendment drive, what do people say the most to you? What are the things that people that are in favor of it come up to you and say, Randy, you're doing a good job because I think...
To be very honest, I haven't had an opportunity to talk to a whole lot of people, but
you've heard it over the years. You've been involved
certainly,
a little more.
Most people think that lobbyists are the biggest problem that we have with respect.
We should limit their terms. There might be a free speech problem there.
Well, you might want to consider limiting the number of organizations they work for at any particular time, but I would say that the strength of the lobbies in Nebraska, particularly when you have a unicameral, and if you don't have a strong petition process over here, gives them moneyed interest, more clout with legislators than their own people in their own districts have many times. I mean,
Are the people you talk to just regular people, not people that have actually worked down there as you?
Right.
Are they aware of the power of lobbyists? Or is that kind of a nebulous? That's part of that thing that happens down there.
It's just kind of out there. I think that I don't think that a lot of people are real familiar with how the lobbying system works in the state of Nebraska, or any state legislature for that matter. I don't think it's any different any place else than it is here.
Do people really understand from how the system works down there?
I think the average Nebraskan knows how the legislative system works, if that's what you're asking, and is fully aware that there are a lot of lobbying organizations and that
that's just part of the way government is.
Yeah, it is, and so that's why we think that we ought to have term limits so that we can sort of counteract the
well, I don't know, but
parts
we
of
have
those things.
show limits. And
Sorry about
it's
that.
called 30 minutes. No, I want to thank you for coming up to Omaha or down, depending on how you look at it. And I want to remind you folks that you can see our show on the web in its entirety. Go to unotv.unomaha.edu. We'll be telling you about this more in the future. You can see Randy tonight on TV and on the web. Thanks for joining us, Randy Rittenauer.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on Consider This. Item
Consider This with host Carol Schrader is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television.